Good morning and welcome. I am Joe Ruffalo. I'm the general manager of The Hill, and we'd like to welcome everyone here in person and that is joining us online for an important discussion today about Medicare and drug pricing. Time to think differently. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Alliance for Aging Research, for their support for this important discussion today. We're here today because the landmark 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, has already helped people eligible for Medicare save on healthcare costs and vaccines and insulin. But as with anything in Washington, that's not the complete story. Increases in utilization management tactics, a guiding framework of health insurers and hospital systems to mitigate costs, are emerging as an unintended consequence of the IRA. Other provisions are starting to shift research dollars away from some medicines and towards others. At the same time, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, are tasked with finding $98.5 billion in savings over the next decade, and to do so while prioritizing equitable patient care. What are the lessons learned from the first round of Medicare direct negotiation, and how can CMS improve the program in year 2? How should Washington address the unintended consequences? What do beneficiaries need to know about for their 2025 drug plans and open enrollment later this year? And how should all stakeholders begin to think differently when it comes to Medicare drug pricing and patients' best interests? We'll begin to answer those questions in a couple of minutes, but a few housekeeping issues before we start. If you're here in the audience, please silence your cell phones. But we do encourage you to join the conversation online. You can follow us on Facebook, X, and Instagram at The Hill Events using the hashtag #TheHillHealth. And with that, I'm delighted to introduce our first guest, Congressman Scott Peters, a Democrat from California and a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee. And he joins Steve Scully, contributing editor to The Hill. Welcome.
Joe, thank you. Thank you all for being here. We have a terrific lineup, a great discussion, and really appreciate it. No better person to kick it off than Congressman Peters, so thank you for being with us. There is a real debate within your own party on the issue of drug prices. So let me begin on that point.
Okay.
So let's talk about the debate.
Well, there is and there isn't. We set out a couple Congresses ago to achieve an objective of capping the price that seniors would pay at the counter under Medicare at $2,000 a year, to make sure prices don't increase faster than inflation, and that's what we did. The wrangling was in how we got there, which I was a part of, because the initial proposal, H.R. 3, would have made drugs eligible for negotiation the minute they came out. So think about what that does to the interest in investors. We'll just go back a little bit. We've spent about $45 billion a year in NIH in basic science research that doesn't produce drugs. The comparable number in the private sector, what they spent in 2018 was $102 billion in research. Why do private companies do that? Well, they do that because they think they can make a return. If they can't make a return, they won't make those investments. An investor is looking to get money back on his or her money is going to say, if I can't get a return on drug investment, I won't invest. I'll invest in real estate, something where I'm going to make money. And the problem with H.R. 3 would have said to investors, sure, if you come up with this blockbuster drug, that's good for you, but we might negotiate the price the minute it comes out. You won't have the typical patent period of time to make a recovery. So all I did, it seemed like a small thing, but was not, was I said, no, I'm not going to support something that doesn't provide that, retain that incentive, and provide a period of time during which people who've invested in drugs can get that money, can get a return. And you have to be conscious of the landscape where 95% of drugs fail. It takes $1 billion to get drugs to market. If you don't provide some return, that you won't have that investment. We've kind of seen a little bit of that coming out of how we set it up. But I'm really happy that I told a pharma CEO, I said, look, I said, I'm the doctor that had to amputate your leg, but we saved your life. Mm-hmm. We didn't kill the industry, which we were on the verge of doing, and I think just by a few votes did not do. So, we did achieve, and this is the thing, the bottom line, we did achieve the objective we did of protecting patients at the counter, $2,000 a year. We also added a cap on insulin spending at $35. So we provided the same relief for seniors that we set out to do at the beginning.
But Joe mentioned the number $98.5 billion in savings. How do you get to that level? How do you reach that level of savings?
Well, through negotiation. I think one thing I also I talked about but didn't get a lot of press is that at the end of the patent period under the current law, there was a lot of abuse, there was a lot of extensions. Some drugs were getting this protection for years and years and years. There's no reason for that. Once you've made your money, Humira was the big example. That thing had been extended out for a long time. There's no need for that kind of protected profits. So when you do negotiation after the appropriate amount of time, you save a lot of money.
So, Congressman, I have a niece who has a rare disease. The drugs are expensive,
Right.
but it has saved her life. How do you deal with that issue when you have drugs that are very precise with diseases that are not common?
Well, you have to realize the choice is the choice you want is having an expensive drug and having to figure out how to pay for it, not having the therapy.
Right.
And the point I was trying to make in that whole discussion over drug pricing was, if you don't provide investors the incentive to make the investment, you're not going to have the therapy in any case. So we should be talking about ways to pay for those kinds of things, but we should make sure that we appreciate this ecosystem where the government invests in basic research, the private industry turns that into therapies, and rare diseases is a really good example of the kind of thing we have to keep our eyes on after IRA. We don't want to have undercut the incentives to deal with diseases where, unlike Crestor, there's a huge market. Everybody's on a statin. You don't have to make a lot of money on each pill to get a return. But if you have a disease that has thousands where we have thousands of patients, to make that return, it has to be expensive. I also think we should think about the value of the innovation to government. For something like hemophilia A, the treatment is $1 million. If you could come up with something that cured hemophilia A, which is what we're talking about, for $500,000, that's actually a good deal. I think when we look at things like Alzheimer's too, that's not a rare disease, obviously, but
Sadly, it's becoming much more common.
it's going to cost us trillions of dollars. So if you can pay for a therapy that would cost you $1 trillion instead of $10 trillion, again, $1 trillion is a lot of money. Whoever invents that should make a ton of money. We should tax those individuals appropriately from a democratic perspective, but we should provide that incentive and we should celebrate it and we should think about the value to us, whether we can save money.
So let's talk about insulin as an example. You keep using the word negotiate, and obviously there had to be negotiations to get the price cap at $35 per usage. How did we get to that point? And take us in the room as government officials, Medicare, Medicaid officials are sitting down with drug CEOs, the pharmaceutical CEOs, to get to that point.
That's not where it came out of. I'll tell you exactly where that came from. I told Nancy Pelosi and Frank Pallone at the beginning of the term, I said, listen, I'm not going to be able to support this. We had the trifecta. We had Democratic control of both chambers and the presidency. It looked like they were going to try to do this through reconciliation. I said right off the bat, I said, this is going to kill the industry. I have 70,000 people in life sciences in San Diego, 1,000 companies. I'm not going to do something that undercuts them. I'm going to come up with an alternative. And I came up with an alternative along the lines of what we ended up with. And I also proposed a $50 a month insulin cap as part of that. And the discussions with the White House came back and they said, would you be okay with $35 a month? Of course I'd be okay with $35. The only thing, you save a little bit less money if you're paying it down to $35 than $50, but that's how that came out. But it's just, we had heard so much about insulin being too expensive for folks, at least in the Medicare side, we could deal with it in that way, and that's how that came out.
Which is exactly why you're here to kick off this program, thinking differently about prices. And that's the topic of this conversation.
Yeah.
How should we think differently, not only now, but over the next 10 to 20 years, especially considering the fact that every day there are 10,000 baby boomers who are retiring and more prevalent, more of a need of drugs and health care.
One is we should keep this industry American. I mean, we're in the process of spending $50 billion to bring back the chips, which we invented in Silicon Valley. That's why it's called that, right? and we let that industry go, and now we realize it's important to our own security. We have this industry here, and I think we should really not take it for granted. I thought that the Democrats' initial approach was really dangerous for the country. Another thing we should think about is value over time. So in the way we budget is really crazy. No one would do this, Steve. You would not come home and tell your family, we can save $10,000 by not fixing the roof, because you think about the $30,000 you're going to lose next year when it rains. But we only think about this year, right?
Why is that?
We have this scoring system here that's so artificial. It says it thinks of every expenditure as this year's money. It doesn't think about what you'd save over time. Today we have things like whole genome sequencing. It's amazing what we could find out today if we spend a little money today about what these patients are going to go through. Lost income, whatever. I can give you examples of what happened at the Baby Bear Project. Look it up at Rady Children's Hospital, where they sequenced kids who are having these difficult diseases, and they were able to find out right away what it was, which, instead of going through this diagnostic odyssey of going from specialist to specialist, what's wrong with my kid? We have those technologies now, but innovation might cost more money up front, even if it saves money down the line. So we have to think about a different way for budgeting and healthcare in particular, because the savings are never going to be this year. Again, I think we should celebrate the innovations of this industry and make sure that we keep it American.
So let me just take that one step further, because are there best practices in other nations that we can learn from? Because to your point, whether it's a budget issue or thinking about healthcare, we're thinking maybe 6 months or a year down the road, not 5, 10 years down the road.
I'm not really familiar with how other countries budget, but this is our thing. We're going to have to invent how to handle it, how to care for it, how to keep it prospering, and how to keep it serving Americans. So in the Budget Committee, which I also serve on, we're talking about how to think about balancing the budget over time. If we don't think about the future costs of all these diseases as part of that calculation, I think we're going to miss the mark. And I think from a budget perspective, within the building, within the Capitol, we should figure out a way to give credit for future savings.
But as you look at the industry holistically and you see the innovation that we have in this country when it comes to drugs, the good news is Americans are living longer. The bad news is it's getting more expensive to live longer, and drugs are a big part of that.
There's a lot of components of healthcare expenditures. Hospital costs are up. We are talking now about pharmacy benefit managers and the middleman, the so-called middleman in the drug chain. While drugs are certainly part of the expenditure, I think we've taken a big step in saving money on that. And you said $96 billion. I thought the estimate was $300 billion. So that's good.
It's a lot of money, regardless.
A lot of money, and I think good on us for taking that first step. But I think most people have characterized what you do about healthcare expenditures as a lot of small steps. There's no big magic bullet. But that was the big one. The IRA really, it's going to save us a ton of money using negotiation for the first time on behalf of Medicare. We're starting the negotiation process now. We won't really find out kind of what happens in the room until afterward. They're going to issue after a negotiation report. We'll look at that. We also ought to make sure we're getting the bill just right. Any huge undertaking like this, whether it's the ACA or the Trump tax program or this thing, we are going to have to go back and tweak, see how it's working. We're already finding that there's some maybe distortions in the incentives we created that we could correct.
Well, let me pause there. What is the biggest fix that you think needs to be made right now with ACA?
There's two. We set out a period of 9 years for small molecules and 13 years for large molecules, biologics. I just saw a graph yesterday that the investment in small molecules in neurology has gone almost to zero. So and the investments in biologics has gone up. So maybe we clear up that disparity. We don't want to disincentivize the very things that I think we wanted to encourage. The other thing is with respect to orphan drugs, if you've got a drug that you have some use for now, but you want to you find other uses for it, there's only protection kind of for the first bite. After that, you get negotiated right away, so there's no incentive to invest in the use of existing drugs for new diseases, orphan diseases in particular, rare diseases, I think are the things you're talking about.
Yeah.
That would be an easy fix. But I think we're in pretty good shape. Let's see how the negotiation goes, and there may be learnings out of that as well, but these are pretty minor in the context of what we've achieved, which is pretty amazing relief for seniors at the counter.
But when you look at Obamacare, ACA, has it met the expectations that you think President Obama, Democrats first put in place with regard to drugs and health care?
I'm old, but I'm not that old. I wasn't here for Obamacare, so I don't know what the expectations were.
But you talked
But
about
I would say,
policies.
look, I mean, the number of insured people is much higher. And, I came in and there was all this talk about Medicare for all, and we have to go to the Canadian system. And I don't hear that anymore, given the lines and the expenses that are occurring in Canada and England. We got a pretty good system with some things we need to fix. And I think Obamacare took a pretty good whack at that and closed a lot of and improved it. And,
So there's no going back.
Oh, there's no going back. I don't think so.
Final question.
By the way, that would be great. I wish the Republicans would declare they're going to repeal Obamacare again. That was pretty good for us.
Well, it didn't work for them in 2018.
Right? Yeah.
Final question, because you're one of those members that this is your issue. You are passionate about this. Why?
Well, I come from San Diego. We have 70,000 people in life sciences. We have 1,000 companies. I have colleagues who tell me, all the research is done at the NIH. But I go in these companies and I meet all these scientists doing really important things. And I'm just so proud of it. And we have big companies like Pfizer and Eli Lilly and Johnson & Johnson. They're great employers. But there's a lot of small, scrappy outfits trying to solve hard science problems with private risk capital. And, I came here to represent San Diego. I'm not going to let them blow that up. And I think we came up with a pretty good solution. And I do think that in our economy in San Diego, but in the United States economy, the innovation economy is so important. This is such a big part of it. So, we're one of the 3 top bio clusters in the country, but we have Qualcomm, which is going to design a lot of these chips. It's really important to me that America keeps this brain power, our piece of the brain power economy, because we're competing with people who want to take that. Particularly China. And so I don't like the idea of self-inflicted wounds. That's how I got into this. Right now I'm working also on permit reform, because we got all these aspirations to build stuff, and we got all these laws that keep us from building stuff. But I can only take one fight against the Democrats at a time. So we're trying to. I do have this theory that leadership begins when you talk back to your own people, and I'm really glad it worked out like it did with drug pricing. I think we came up with a great result. Democrats are running on it all over the country. Now I think we should fix the environmental laws to modernize them for today, and that's my issue right now.
Final question. We're going to go a minute over, but unlike the debate tonight, we're not going to mute the mic.
Yeah, okay,
so
good.
You can continue. Broad question. The future of drug pricing in this country is what?
I wouldn't say it's settled, but I think it's incremental. We should make adjustments as we go along and see what we can do to make sure that what we've done really has achieved the objectives that we want. And I think we should expect a good discussion about that in the next few terms.
Just for the record, that was a phone. That was not a bell to cut you off. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us.
Great
to be with you. We appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.